questions for Esther, please raise your hand and our volunteers will give you a piece of paper and a pen to write down your questions for Esther. And I have a few questions I'd like to start off with. All right. What are some differences between college in the USA and the college in Korea?
I guess a big difference is there's a big emphasis here in Korea about separation of sexes, so male and female to be separated. In the U.S., it's not uncommon for a male visitor to go into a female dorm or things like that. So I thought that's a big difference, which I actually think is better in Korea. I don't really think that's a good thing. Also in the U.S., there's a lot of partying, drinking on school grounds. In Korea, obviously, it's a lot less prevalent. I just think the U.S. is very, how do I say? In college, it was very more about social, fun, things like that. In Korea, it's very, study. You got to do well.
Okay. Now, you played soccer for 8 years when you were growing up. Do you think that playing soccer and sports helps with relationships in school?
I do. I think it helps a lot actually with my goal, my journey of what I want to do. Unfortunately, I'm pretty competitive. So
Unfortunately?
Because some people are not, and so it's maybe I come on too aggressive, too strong. It's made me very aggressive. In the business aspect, it's very good for someone to be able to take the lead and do things like that. And with competition, I always aim higher. So for me, that's always been better.
Okay. Now, you said that you came to Gwangju to study Korean. Was that chosen for you? How did that come about that you ended up at Chonnam University?
Okay, so for the KJSP scholarship, it's through the National International Education Institute, and it's mandatory for that everyone who's accepted that they learn Korean for a year. And what happens is that I think there are around 700 students from around the world that were chosen, and they send them to about 7 different universities. So I didn't get to choose. So what happens is I was able to choose Yonsei as my MBA program, but Korean University, they choose for you. And then you also have to learn it for a year, and then you have to pass TOEFL level 3, which is the equivalent of the TOEFL test, just Korean proficiency test.
So these other students, they got placed in other cities,
Exactly.
like in Seoul and Busan?
Busan, Daegu.
Okay. All right. Just a question to go along with that. Growing up, was everything in Korean inside the house?
Yes. Except that growing up when I was younger, of course, I didn't appreciate my language as much as I probably should have. But being young, my mother would talk to me in Korean, but I would answer in English sometimes. But that helped her because she learned English too. But luckily, the majority was Korean in the household. So to that, as an adult, I'm very thankful. Because I have friends in the U.S. who are also Korean and Korean parents. Their parents can speak Korean, but they can't speak Korean.
How far did the Korean education go in your house? Did you have to read newspapers or anything like that?
Oh no, I don't even think I can read newspaper now. For me, it was just spoken really. I learned a little bit of writing while my father was a minister because my mom did the Sunday school, so we learned in our books and stuff. But it was everything else other than spoken was pretty much elementary level.
Okay. I wanted to ask you a question. I kind of got off the topic, but for your time in Gwangju, have you lived in any other cities, or is Gwangju your first experience here in Korea?
Gwangju is my first experience in Korea, but I travel to Seoul often because all my relatives are there. As I mentioned, my sister lives there.
So what are a couple things that you love about Gwangju, about living here?
The air. So 공기가 훨씬 더 맑고. It's not as busy, and people are much more friendly. I really like that. Anywhere I go, I feel like, I'm treated like someone's daughter, like, their sister. something like that. In Seoul, it's a little bit, everyone's about their own business. You know, it's, for instance, if I fall on the street, maybe someone in Gwangju will make, oh, 괜찮으세요? But in Seoul, they'll just look and keep on moving.
I've lived in both and I find the same thing. Living here feels more like a family. And when I walk by other foreigners here, they'll smile and wave. And in Seoul, it's kind of just, they'll look away because they're busy going somewhere. So it's more of a family feel living here, I agree. All right, some questions from the audience. What do you think about the differences in Korean art and American art? It says arts, but it doesn't say specifically, just in general. The arts that you like.
The arts that I like, I guess I would say, for me, in the U.S., I haven't seen a lot of like calligraphy. The calligraphy, literally in art-wise, in Korea, I think is absolutely beautiful. And the fact that just brush strokes and like how much strength to use and things like that, that people can memorize and through their hands just make these beautiful murals or fans or things like that. In the U.S., I don't think I've ever seen anything like that based on calligraphy.
What influences did your grandfather give to you?
Unfortunately, 친할아버지는 못 만났어요. 돌아가셨어요. 태어나기 전에.
And the question also, what was his relationship with Mr. Kim Gu?
So my grandfather fought very hard 통일 위해서. 우리 아버지 쪽은 북한 쪽이에요. Yeah. So obviously my father didn't grow up in North Korea. He was able to live in Seoul, and so because of that, my grandfather, my 친할아버지, was a politician when he was alive, and he fought extremely hard for the reunification of Korea, which is why my father is no longer minister now, and he works for the National University, National Reunification Council in the States, but it's based for Korea.
Okay. Some difference, we're asking a lot of differences between America and Korea. So what are some differences with church in America and Korea?
See, for me, there was no difference because it was Korean churches.
You went to Korean churches in America?
Always Korean churches. So it's pretty much the same.
It's the same. All right. We're jumping around here because the questions come in at different times. So can we go back to high school?
Sure.
Somebody wants to know how your experience in high school, what was it like?
It was good. It was hard for me because in the town that I grew up, it was all like Caucasian people, and it was hard for me to kind of identify with everyone because obviously I'm Korean, and so it was harder for me. But I adjusted well. You know, it's not like anyone discriminated against me or anything like that, and I just did well studying. I actually really enjoyed it. I liked having to learn the instrument and learning French. For me, I feel like as an adult, it's done a lot of helpful things for me.
Yeah, that's good. I just noticed that I have a lot of similar things with you. When I came to Korea, I did a lot of volunteering as well, and I spent a lot of time, my free time, doing volunteering. Do you have any other hobbies that you do here besides going out and doing volunteering and things like that?
I like to go mountain hiking, climbing mountains. I also just I just have this thing about looking up places online, like just beautiful sceneries, and going and just kind of sitting there quietly and reading. Just the how can I say, the scenery of Gwangju is just really beautiful. You know, the high mountains. One thing that I really respect is that sometimes I'll go early in the morning and I'll notice that there's, you know, these old ladies at like 5 a.m., you know, starting to farm already and things like that. So for me, I think that's really respectable, commendable.
So what else is on the list of places you'd love to visit in your life, anywhere in the world?
I guess I would want to, right now I want to travel to Fiji. I have a class, not my class, we're split up in two classes. There's another student from Fiji, and he's shown me photos. It's actually really beautiful. I've never been to any tropic island yet, so that's one place that I really want to go.
Okay. All right. One question asks about your father, if he was involved towards the Korean unification movement.
Maybe my grandfather?
Your father or your grandfather?
I believe that my grandfather actually attended one of the 38 parallel talks at some point. He was one of the youngest speakers to speak there.
And what are some influences that your father had on you? There might be many, right?
Just my father. One thing that my father told me before I came to Korea that I didn't realize until I got here was don't try to change. You know, so going to Korea, don't try to follow trends and you're fine, you're perfect the way you are. Don't think that you have to go there and change yourself. And at first I didn't know what he meant, but coming to Korea, I kind of see what he meant.
So that reminds me of a different question. I have a lot of friends that are Korean American as well, and they say that they sometimes experience a identity crisis.
Right.
Now you grew up in America, but you were from a Korean family. How do you feel? Are you more Korean than American, or how do you feel about that for yourself?
I mean, for me, honestly, I feel 50-50. But if it boiled down to it, I would have to say that I feel Korean because the blood that runs through my veins is Korean.
And what is your favorite foods? Are you eating more Korean food in America or a mix of both?
It's funny, it's just a mix of both every time. So when I go to the U.S., I want Korean food, and then sometimes when I'm here, I want U.S. food.
I know how you feel when you miss pizza from U.S.A.
Really
I'm from New Jersey, so our states are very close.
Yeah.
And I've been to Amherst. I applied to UMass, and so I've been to a lot of the places you mentioned. And
Antonio's.
What's that?
Antonio's Pizza?
I haven't been there. I haven't been there. But the picture of the pizza that you showed,
Antonio's.
are you sure?
Positive.
It looked like Korean pizza to me.
No.
All right. What do you hope for the future using your experience from Korea? How can that change your future or direct your future?
I gotta think about that. I would say coming to Korea, it's given me the opportunity to kind of adapt, like teach myself how to adapt. That's something that I lacked because I always lived in Amherst. I went to school not too far from my hometown. I never did study abroad or anything like that, and I hadn't really traveled around the world until I had come to Korea. So for me, coming to Korea, it's been able to help teach me how to adapt when I go somewhere else. So I think that wherever I go, if I'm on a business trip or something like that, I'll be able to quickly adapt thanks to my experience here in Korea.
All right, so you've accomplished so much in your life already, and you said that in the future that you'd love to be a CEO, either in Korea or in the United States.
Right.
Are there any other goals, any other things that you'd like to accomplish, say in the next 10 years?
I want to learn how to play, what is the Korean food? PD? Yeah. That would be fun.
If you were to have a family, would you like to raise your family in Korea or in America?
That is a million-dollar question.
Is that a hard question?
It's a hard question. I think that I would want to have a place to stay here in Korea and in the U.S. But I think that in terms of schooling, I would have them schooled in the U.S. and then during breaks, I'd have them come to Korea to spend time with their family.
Are there any other questions? That's it? All right, so that is the end of our Q&A section of the talk. All right, so we're